On November 11th, Canada solemnly conducted a ceremony in honor of Remembrance Day. Parliament Hill glowed with red poppies. The rhythmic step of thousands of soldiers merged with the rumble of bagpipes, affirming national pride. But just a day later in Moscow, Russia organized a grandiose demonstration of military power, and media around the world trumpeted about it. And then at an international conference on defense in Geneva, before hundreds of experts, scientists, and journalists, one Russian speaker allowed himself an arrogant remark. "The Canadian ceremony is nothing. It cannot compare even with a small fraction of Russian power." These words caused a buzz in the hall. Someone chuckled, someone nodded approvingly. But no one expected that immediately after this, a Canadian journalist would calmly stand up and with just a few short phrases force the whole hall to fall silent and the arrogant mockers to shamefully lower their heads. What happened in that moment, and how did one voice from Canada manage to turn the tide of an international discussion? Let us follow this story full of pride. The conference hall sparkled with light. Flags of different countries stood in even rows behind the presidium table. More than 1,000 people from all over the world were present. Retired officers, international scientists, journalists, even veterans of the defense industry. Everyone was waiting for opinions on regional security. Professor Volkov, a military expert from Moscow, stood on the podium, his voice sounding loud and distinct. He pronounced every word with pressure, intentionally allowing the microphone to carry the echo through the huge hall. Canada may conduct ceremonies for self-consolation, but in essence, it is just a symbolic performance. What can a country with small economic influence do with a few dozen outdated tanks and several old squadrons? Compared to us, they are like a candle before the sun. From the corner of the hall came a chuckle. Several young Russian delegates applauded, and the whole atmosphere seemed to lean to the side of the one who had just uttered these biting words. In the rows for the press, Liam, a Canadian journalist, tightly gripped a pen in his hand. Blood rushed to his face. His heart beat wildly. He knew that if he remained silent, these derogatory words would be perceived as a given in the eyes of hundreds of people sitting here. But if he stood up, it would no longer be a personal opinion, but a voice representing a whole people. The moderator from Switzerland, Anna, glanced toward the Canadian seats. She nodded slightly. "I invite the representative from Canada, journalist Liam. Do you want to share your opinion?" The light of the cameras immediately focused on him. The whispering subsided. The whole hall froze in anticipation. Liam took a deep breath, put down the pen, and stood up. The quiet creak of the chair sounded in complete silence. He took the microphone. His voice was calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to speak." The whole hall froze, gazes fixed on him, waiting to see how the Canadian journalist would answer the provocation that had just sounded. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to speak." The short phrase sounded in the silence, forcing hundreds of people to involuntarily straighten up. Cameras immediately pointed their lenses at the man in a simple white shirt with the accreditation of a Canadian journalist on his chest. Some foreign reporters whispered, "Is that the journalist from Ottawa? How does he intend to react?" Liam held the microphone. His gaze glided over the hall. His heart was still pounding, but his voice was calm and clear, every word seemingly imprinted in the air. "Remembrance Day in Canada, ladies and gentlemen, does not have the goal of competing in quantity or chasing after pomp. It is a tribute to the memory of our ancestors who fell on the fields of battle. It is a reminder to the young generation that today's independence was won with blood and sweat, and precisely in this lies our real strength." A hum rose in the hall. Some international delegates were surprised by his calmness and clarity of thought. Interpreters hurriedly translated into different languages. Whispers were heard in headphones. Many bowed their heads, listening. Professor Volkov raised an eyebrow. The corners of his lips twisted in a sarcastic smirk. He lightly tapped his fingers on the table and slowly replied, "Beautifully said. But gentlemen, in this world, peace is protected by weapons. Spirit will not stop a missile. Will does not shoot down a bomber. And the Canadian ceremony, in the end, is just a procession for self-reassurance. These cold words, like the blade of a knife, forced many to hold their breath. Some listeners nodded approvingly. From the corner where the Russian delegation sat, laughter rang out. Liam did not let go of the microphone. His eyes shone with determination. He did not raise his voice, but every word sounded firm. Professor, ladies and gentlemen, weapons can be bought for money, but national spirit cannot be taken on credit. And history has proven that the Canadian people have more than once faced an enemy many times surpassing them in strength. If everything was measured only by quantity, we would have ceased to exist long ago. But we are still here, and our flag flies over our country. Suddenly applause rang out from the middle rows where the Indian delegation sat. Several scientists from Brazil and South Africa also nodded. The hall divided into two camps. Some continued to mock, others began to listen attentively. Professor Volkov was taken aback for a moment, but quickly recovered and beckoned a technical staff member with a gesture. The large screen behind his back lit up. On it appeared a comparative table. The number of tanks, planes, ships of Russia and Canada differed tens, hundreds of times. He triumphantly pointed to the screen. Please, look at these numbers. One objective comparison is enough to see how small Canada is in military terms. Their ceremony, if we call it a demonstration of force, is the same as comparing a candle with the sun. The hall buzzed. Cameras showed the table in close-up. Some viewers whispered, "Too big a difference. What can Canada object to this?" Liam looked at the screen. Inside, everything was boiling, but his face remained calm. He slowly pronounced, "Professor, yes, these numbers are undeniable. But I want to ask you, does possessing a large amount of weapons guarantee peace? Do nations exist thanks to arsenals or thanks to unbending will? If the measure was only numbers, world history would not know examples when small nations rose to defend their country against powerful powers." He paused, looked straight into the camera lens. His voice became firmer. "Canada conducts a ceremony not to scare neighbors, but to remind its children and grandchildren that freedom is not given just like that. We measure strength not by the quantity of weapons, but by the vital force of the nation. That force which no country can calculate in a table." This time the applause was more scattered, but sounded distinctly. Several foreign journalists quickly raised cameras. Someone was hurriedly making notes. The atmosphere became less tense. A note of curiosity appeared. Professor Volkov frowned, twisted his lips. "Beautiful. But these are just beautiful words. When it comes to the real battlefield, can spirit stop bullets? I ask you, gentlemen, be realists. Do not allow touching stories to obscure the cruel truth." This phrase, it seemed, should have ended the dispute. Several claps in support rang out from the sector of Russian viewers. Liam tightly gripped the microphone. He took a deep breath, remembering the morning of November 11th at the National War Memorial, gray-haired veterans sitting silently with moist eyes as the columns passed by them. He clearly felt that if he remained silent, this sacred feeling would be mocked, turned into a joke. He began to speak, quietly but firmly. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to tell one short story." The whole hall froze, hundreds of eyes fixed on him. The hall fell silent after Liam's words. "Allow me to tell one short story." He held the microphone. His gaze was direct, voice even but distinct. On the morning of November 11th, when columns of soldiers were passing by the memorial, the lens of a television camera caught a row of veterans. Among them was a gray-haired old man, on whose chest medals sparkled. He sat with a straight back, and tears stood in his eyes when he looked at the waving maple leaf. He said to his neighbor just one phrase, "As long as the country is alive, as long as the flag flies, we are alive too." Ladies and gentlemen, for Canada, precisely in this lies the power of Remembrance Day. In the reminder that independence is never given for free. A wave of whispers rose. Someone quietly nodded. Someone frowned. But it was obvious that this story forced the hall to fall silent for a moment. Professor Volkov smiled bitterly, clapped his hands 2 times, and slowly said, "Touching. But we are at an international conference on defense, where they speak in the language of numbers, in the language of real power, and not sentimental stories. I will allow myself to return you to reality." He gave a sign to the technicians, and the large screen behind his back lit up again. On it appeared colorful graphs and diagrams. Russia has more than 1 million active personnel, Canada, less than 100,000. The number of tanks in Russia, many thousands in Canada, hardly a fraction of that number. Fighters in Russia, thousands in Canada, just a modest fleet. Regarding ships and submarines, the difference is manifold. Professor Volkov turned with a triumphant look. I ask you, gentlemen, look at these numbers. This is reality. On one side, a leading military power of the world; on the other, a country with aging armaments. So what is the sense in the Canadian ceremony except a symbolic performance? Whom can it scare? Can it protect the country? Or is it simply a spectacle for self-consolation? A noise rose. Many applauded in sign of support. The camera glided over the viewers, capturing several nodding heads and several mocking smiles. Liam looked at the screen. Every number beat upon his eyes, as if trying to strangle his pride. He knew perfectly well that this difference could not be denied, but he also knew that if he allowed the thesis about power measured only by numbers to take the upper hand, Canada would always be looked down upon. He raised the microphone. His voice sounded loud and clear. Ladies and gentlemen, these numbers are correct, but I want to ask, does a large amount of weapons guarantee peace? Does possessing a huge nuclear arsenal mean that the people will live in tranquility? Or are there nations that continue to proudly exist because their strength is measured not by quantity, but by unbending will? He paused, sweeping his gaze over the hall. Several international scientists from Europe and Southeast Asia began to whisper. Many journalists were feverishly writing in notebooks. Liam continued with a confident voice. Remembrance Day in Canada is not aimed at the demonstration of weapons. We do not participate in an arms race to brag, but to remind that every step of today's soldier is an echo of the past. It is a reminder to future generations that for this freedom payment was made with blood. Weapons over time can become outdated and fail, but memory and spirit are eternal. A hum rose in the hall. Some applauded scatteredly, but then the applause became louder. The camera captured the faces of many international delegates nodding approvingly. Professor Volkov narrowed his eyes. The smile disappeared from his face. He approached the microphone, lowered his voice, but emphasized every word. So you dare to claim that spirit can replace weapons? If tomorrow a strong enemy attacks, can these touching words stop missiles? Can they protect the country? The hall fell quiet. The tension rose again. Many turned to Liam, waiting for an answer. He squeezed the microphone, fingers trembled slightly, but his voice was low and firm. Professor, I do not deny the role of weapons, but I would like to remind you of one fact. Canada has many times defended the world alongside armies, many times surpassing it in size. Not because we had more tanks, but because behind the army stood the people. Weapons without the support of the people are just cold metal, and when the people have spirit, any weapon in their hands becomes a force. The whole hall suddenly fell silent. Several people from international delegations began to applaud first, then the applause spread. The camera glided down, capturing the thoughtful looks of many scientists. Professor Volkov froze. He was about to say something, but suddenly a hand rose from the back rows. It was an elderly person in an old military blazer, faded from time, on the chest of which hung several old medals and a bright red poppy. He leaned on a cane and stood up. His voice trembled, but sounded loud. I am a veteran of the Second World War. I survived days when bombs fell on us, and the enemy was many times stronger. And yet we stood firm. Ladies and gentlemen, we won not only thanks to weapons, but thanks to the spirit and the people who stood behind our backs. Today's ceremony is a reminder precisely about this." The whole hall froze, and then unexpectedly exploded with stormy applause. The camera aimed straight at the exhausted but proud face of the old soldier. Liam looked at this scene, and his heart clenched. He understood that in this moment the situation began to change. Applause, like waves, did not subside in the hall for a long time. The camera showed the face of the old man in the faded blazer in close-up. His cloudy eyes shone with pride. On his chest, under the light of the lamps, gleamed medals with worn edges. He leaned on the cane. His voice trembled, but was distinct. "I went through the war. I stood in the ranks. I saw how comrades fell next to me. We fought for peace. Today, I see my grandchildren and great-grandchildren at the ceremony in Ottawa, and I understand that the blood of my comrades was spilled not in vain. Therefore, please, do not consider our ceremony a performance. It is memory. It is faith. It is a promise to those who died." Silence fell. Many international delegates lowered their heads. Some journalists wiped away tears. The initial whispering from the side of the Russian viewers also ceased. Liam looked at the old man. His heart was overflowing with emotions. He knew that he was not alone. The voice of the past sounded, drowning out the cold numbers. But just at that moment, when the hall fell quiet, Professor Volkov approached the microphone with a pale smile on his lips. "Respected veteran, your story touched me, but forgive me, we are discussing today's reality of security, not the past. Spirit and memory are beautiful, but if war starts tomorrow, can they protect the country? Today's world works on technologies, on the force of deterrence, and not on memories." Scattered applause was heard again from the sector of the Russian delegation. The touching atmosphere instantly changed to tension. Liam tightly gripped the microphone. He understood that now he must support the fire just lit, not let it go out under a hail of ridicule. He raised his head. His voice sounded clear. "Professor, ladies and gentlemen, yes, we must look at today's reality. But please do not forget that history is not an exhibit for a museum. History is a living lesson, the foundation of today's strength. If a nation forgets what path it traveled, then even the most huge arsenal will be only a tree without roots." Applause sounded loudly, this time stronger. The camera glided over the international rows. An Indian scientist nodded. A French journalist whispered, "Exactly so." Professor Volkov frowned slightly but maintained calmness. He changed tactics. "Ladies and gentlemen, I do not deny the role of spirit, but let us be realists. A small country with a small amount of weapons cannot survive without the patronage of great powers. Does Canada not exist today thanks to the help of others? If not for this, would they be standing here to argue?" These words, like a knife, struck at the very heart of pride. A strong hum rose. From the sector of Russian viewers came several chuckles. The camera showed Liam's face in close-up, waiting for his reaction. He tightly gripped the microphone. In his eyes, a fire flashed. He knew that this question was aimed not only at him, but at the entire history of the nation, and he would not allow it to be left without an answer. The whole hall held its breath. Professor Volkov's question was sharp as a blade, directed straight at the pride of a Canadian person. "If not for patronage, would Canada exist today?" Liam stood straight, still holding the microphone. His gaze glided over the hall. He knew that if he evaded the answer, Canada would always be perceived as weak. If he answered too emotionally, he would be considered biased. He had to choose another path, with sharp logic, restrained, but no less decisive. He began to speak in a low but resonant voice. "Professor, ladies and gentlemen, if you say that Canada exists thanks to dependence, then allow me to ask, who spilled blood on the fields of battles throughout history? Who fell so that our flag continued to fly? We appreciate the help of friends, but no one could protect this land instead of the Canadian people themselves." Immediately, a hum rose. Some international scientists leaned forward, listening attentively. Liam continued with a loud voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, weapons can be received in aid, but the spirit of independence no one will gift. In the harshest years, if the Canadian people were not full of determination to fight, could this help hold every patch of land? Precisely, will and courage are the foundation, and not patronage, as the professor says. Applause rang out from the sector of the delegation of Southeast Asia. An Indonesian scientist nodded energetically. The camera captured foreign journalists smiling in sign of agreement. Professor Volkov was slightly confused, but still tried to maintain an arrogant look. He chuckled with sarcasm. Sounds heroic, but today's world is not like the past. The era of history lessons has passed. Look at the present. How long can a small country with a small amount of weapons hold out among great powers? Liam immediately answered. His voice was cold, but calm. Professor, if we look at the world only through the prism of big and small countries, then we will always miss the most important lesson: justice. Real strength lies not only in the arsenal, but in whether the people believe in their country. A country may possess thousands of missiles, but if the people turn away from it, all this will turn into a pile of scrap metal. The whole hall exploded with applause. From the European sector came shouts of "Bravo!" American, French, German journalists whispered. Their eyes burned. Professor Volkov frowned. He stepped off the podium, walked around it, as if trying to exert pressure, then stopped and pointed the microphone straight at Liam. You speak beautifully, but if national spirit is enough, why then have many other small nations disappeared from the map of the world? Can spirit replace technologies, or is it simply a sedative? The hall buzzed again. Some viewers turned to Liam with a searching gaze, waiting. The atmosphere was tense to the limit. Liam took a deep breath. Images from books about war rushed through his head. Pictures of simple people who defended their villages, their land with bare hands. He raised his head high. His voice sounded confident. Professor, I do not deny technologies. But allow me to ask, if there are only technologies, but no will, no support of the people, can this weapon hold the country? Canada exists, not thanks to someone's patronage, but because Canadians never gave up. This is what distinguishes us. Applause thundered through the whole hall, not stopping. Many cameras were directed straight at Liam, fixing every feature of his face, every word. Professor Volkov tightly gripped the microphone. Irritation was reflected on his face, but before he managed to object, a hand rose from the end of the hall. It was a British journalist with bright blonde hair. She stood up and asked in a clear voice, "Excuse me, Professor Volkov, but if we rely only on military force, can the world be stable? And I would like to ask the Canadian journalist, if not participating in an arms race, how does Canada intend to protect peace?" All eyes rushed to Liam. The camera showed his face in close-up. This was the most difficult moment. He had to give a convincing answer not only to Professor Volkov, but to the whole world which was watching the broadcast live. The British journalist's question shook the whole hall. Many made noise, discussing. All gazes were fixed on Liam. He stood there, microphone still in hand. Sweat appeared on his forehead, but his gaze was unwavering. He began to speak in a clear voice. Canada does not participate in an arms race to prove its strength. We build our defense on the principle of sufficiency. Enough for self-defense, enough for the protection of our people, and enough to send a clear signal. We love peace, but we will never bow our heads. Precisely therefore, our ceremony of remembrance is aimed not at boasting, but at the reminder that today's world was won with blood, and so that the young generation understands that a nation is truly strong only when the people believe in their homeland. The hall fell silent for a few seconds, and then exploded with applause, which spread from the delegations of Southeast Asia to the European and African rows. The camera glided over the hall, capturing nodding faces, touched looks. Professor Volkov frowned. His lips were tightly compressed. He returned to his seat, but his gaze remained hostile, as if he did not intend to give up. The morning session ended in an atmosphere of tension mixed with excitement. When people began to disperse, Liam went out into the corridor, sighing with relief, as if he had just come out of battle. But he did not have time to relax, as someone's hand lay on his shoulder. It was a member of the organizing committee, a Swiss with a polite look. His voice was quiet, barely audible. "Mr. Liam, I just wanted to remind you of the necessity to be careful. Criticism is good, but one should not go too far. This is an international forum, and we must maintain balance." Liam looked him straight in the eyes, nodded politely, but in his soul a thought rose. If truth cannot be spoken due to fear of disturbing the balance, then what justice will remain then? He went further. His phone vibrated. On the screen appeared an anonymous message. "Shut up, or your journalistic career will end here." Liam froze. Cold sweat ran down his back. He looked around the corridor. People entered and exited, but no one paid attention to him. It was clear that this was a targeted warning. He tightly squeezed the phone in his hand. For a moment, anxiety flashed in his head. If he continues, will he have to pay for it? But then he remembered the look of the old veteran, remembered the stormy applause of international friends. A thought flashed in his head. Silence now is equivalent to agreement. He could not retreat. That evening, Liam returned to the hotel room. Outside the window, Geneva shone with lights. The streets were lively. He sat at the table, opened the laptop, quickly sketched several lines in an electronic notebook. "Today I said what I had to say. They can threaten, can exert pressure, but truth cannot be buried. Tomorrow I will continue." He closed the laptop, took a deep breath. He knew that ahead, a still more serious battle awaited him, and tomorrow morning before the entire international press, he would have to meet face-to-face with Professor Volkov in an open discussion. The next morning, the hall for press conferences was overcrowded. Hundreds of journalists crowded. Cameras were directed at the podium. The atmosphere was heated to the limit, as if on a battlefield. The moderator announced that after yesterday's heated debates, the organizing committee decided to dedicate the morning press conference to direct questions from the press. "Please, your questions." Immediately, a Japanese journalist raised a hand. "Mr. Liam, Canada does not have much modern weaponry, so why conduct a ceremony? Is this not simply a formality to hide weakness?" A murmur rose in the hall. Liam took the microphone. His gaze was calm. "Our ceremony is not aimed at hiding something. On the contrary, it reminds the whole people that peace is not given for free. It is a way to pay tribute of respect to our ancestors and confirm that the Canadian Army is born by the people and for the people. This is the most solid strength." Rare applause rang out, but immediately after this, an American journalist jumped up. His voice was sharp. "You speak touchingly, but allow me to ask. If you do not have a large arsenal, with what will you protect the country? Will you not have to rely completely on the intervention of other great powers?" The stinging question caused noise in the hall. The camera showed Liam in close-up, waiting to see how he would cope with the situation. He took a deep breath and answered clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen, military power is important, but one cannot rely only on it. Canada builds its defense on principles of self-reliance, independence, valuing alliances but standing on its own feet. We have enough forces to protect our country, and, what is most important, our people believe in this." Applause rang out from the side of the ASEAN rows, but from the side of the Russian delegation, laughter was heard. Suddenly, the large screen behind lit up. A video clip was shown, edited from fragments of Remembrance Day in Ottawa, where only unfortunate angles were shown. Several old vehicles and shots with modern fighters and equipment were cut out. At the bottom ran a line, "Canadian ceremony, just a formality." The hall buzzed. Several foreign journalists whispered, Are these official materials? Why does everything look so wretched? Liam stood silently, looking at the screen. He immediately understood that this was a targeted blow, editing for the distortion of the image. For a moment, it seemed to him that the whole hall was leaning to the side of his opponent. Moderator Anna frowned, turning to the technicians. "Where is this video from? Who provided it?" No one answered. Professor Volkov smiled, crossing his arms. Liam tightly gripped the microphone. In his head, a decision flashed. If he did not answer now, the truth would be distorted. He took a step forward. His voice sounded loud. "Ladies and gentlemen, this video clip was edited. In it, only old shots are chosen to deceive perception. But those of you who watched the live broadcast clearly saw that we have modern aviation. There are defense systems. There are thousands of soldiers marching in step. And, what is most important, tens of thousands of solemn people on the streets. Here is the true image of Canada." The hall buzzed again. Some journalists began to search for materials in their computers. Someone checked original pictures. Rumors spread quickly. "Yes, I watched live. There was not only a few old vehicles." Liam looked straight into the camera lens. His voice was low and strong. "A truly strong one does not need to distort the truth. And if one has to resort to editing to prove one's superiority, then this is not strength, but weakness." This phrase, like the blow of a hammer, sounded in the hall. Applause exploded. This time it was longer and louder, spreading through the whole hall. The camera showed many foreign journalists in close-up, nodding. Someone raised a thumb in sign of approval. Professor Volkov froze, but his gaze remained challenging. He approached the microphone. His voice was persistent. "Good. If you consider that spirit is more important, prepare. This afternoon, I propose to the organizing committee to conduct a direct discussion so that the whole world sees how long Canada can withstand the naked truth of numbers." The hall buzzed. Cameras turned to Liam. It seemed the whole world waited for his answer. He tightly gripped the microphone, heartbeat wildly. This was no longer a question, but a public challenge. Professor Volkov's challenge echoed through the hall. Hundreds of eyes rushed to Liam, waiting to see if he dared to accept it. The atmosphere heated up like a stretched string ready to burst at any moment. Liam stood silently for several seconds, his hand tightly gripping the microphone. In his head flashed images of Remembrance Day, columns of veterans, aircraft cutting through the sky, people with red poppies, and thousands of citizens waving flags. He knew that truth is always stronger than edited videos. He raised his head high. His voice sounded loud. "Ladies and gentlemen, I accept the challenge. If a direct discussion is needed, I am ready. But first, allow me a few minutes right here to clarify the situation with the video just shown." A noise rose in the hall. Cameras approached Liam's face, fixing every detail of his gaze. Moderator Anna nodded slightly, giving a sign to the technicians. Liam took a flash drive from his pocket and passed it to the technical staff. "These are original materials from Canadian television, the full recording of the ceremony. I want you to compare and see the difference." The large screen lit up, and on it appeared a majestic picture. Neat columns of soldiers marching in step, light armored vehicles rumbling past, search and rescue helicopters following one another, and in the sky roared jets, leaving behind white trails of smoke, cutting the clouds. The lens also captured the faces of gray-haired veterans with shining eyes and a sea of people wearing poppies and greeting the troops on both sides of the street. The whole hall froze. These live images were too bright, too different from the previous edited video. Many foreign journalists whispered, "Indeed, they cut it. Unfair. The original is much more impressive." Liam took a step forward. His voice was low but sharp. "As you see, truth cannot be hidden. That clip was distorted to turn our ceremony into a laughingstock. But when the truth was shown, you saw the difference. And please remember, A truly strong country does not need to resort to editing to prove its superiority. Applause exploded, this time stronger and more persistent. The camera glided over faces. A French journalist jumped up and applauded. An Indian scientist nodded continuously. The Indonesian delegation exchanged approving looks. Professor Volkov froze. His face reddened slightly. He tightly gripped the microphone, trying to maintain calmness. Good, you looked at pictures. But remember, several squadrons of planes or several dozen tanks cannot change the strategic layout. The ceremony in Canada, however beautifully filmed, cannot hide the real difference in power. Liam did not evade. He nodded. Yes, we do not deny the difference, but we do not hide it either. We conduct the ceremony not to compare every cannon, every tank. We conduct the ceremony to remind our people where this independence came from and how it must be protected. This is a force which cannot be measured by any numbers. Applause rang out again, echoing from the ceiling of the hall. At this moment, moderator Anna spoke. Thank you both. After this press conference, the organizing committee decided that this afternoon a direct broadcast of debates to the whole world will take place between Professor Volkov and journalist Liam, so that the world not only hears, but also sees. A noise rose. Cameras spun. This would be a real battle, without editing, without omissions. Liam took a deep breath, heartbeat wildly. He knew that what would happen this afternoon would be not just a personal dispute, but a question of honor of a whole nation. In the afternoon in Geneva, the golden sun flooded the shiny glass buildings. After the sensational press conference, the news about the altercation between Liam and Professor Volkov quickly flew around international sites. Many newspapers came out with loud headlines. Canadian journalist threw challenge to Russian expert at security forum. Excerpts from Liam's speeches were constantly published, gaining tens of thousands of views in just a few hours. In a small cafe next to the hotel, Liam sat with several new international friends whom he met at the forum. Moderator Anna was also there. The atmosphere was less formal, but everyone understood that a big battle lay ahead tomorrow. Indian scientist Raj knocked on the table. Liam, you must prepare well. Professor Volkov will not retreat so simply. He masterfully uses numbers and overwhelming comparisons. But do not forget that numbers do not always reflect the truth. Claire, a French journalist, added, "You need short and biting phrases. TV viewers will not remember long reasonings, but they will remember key words, strong images." Anna looked at Liam with a serious gaze. Tomorrow it will not be simply a dispute, but the main event for world media. Millions of people will watch. You need to maintain calmness, and remember that every word of yours will be perceived as the voice of Canada. Liam nodded. His gaze was full of determination. He opened a notebook and wrote 3 short phrases, each of which was like an arrow. Weapons can be bought, but national spirit can never be taken on credit. A country is strong not when it has a large arsenal, but when the people believe in their country. Real strength is not in forcing others to fear, but in forcing the whole world to respect. He underlined every phrase, repeating it to himself, to turn them into a sharp weapon for tomorrow. Night came. Geneva shone with lights. Life boiled on the streets. In his hotel room, Liam opened the laptop to check the news. Suddenly he saw in social networks a short, distorted video clip with his speech and the caption, "Canada admits its weakness, relying only on spirit." Liam's heart clenched. It was obvious that someone had started a dirty information campaign to undermine trust in him before the debates. He closed the screen, took a deep breath. In his head sounded the voice of the old veteran from the hall. "As long as the country is alive, as long as the flag flies, we are alive too." He whispered quietly, "Tomorrow I will speak not for myself. I will speak for the whole people." Outside the window blew the night Geneva wind. Liam sat silently at the table and wrote in his diary. Night before the big battle. I'm not afraid to lose. I am afraid that the truth will be distorted. If I remain silent, it will be equivalent to agreement. And if I speak out, even if I suffer failure, I will not regret." He closed the notebook, stood up, and looked at the bright sky of the city. A new day awaited him, and together with it, a battle not only of arguments, but of honor. On the next day, the large hall of the Congress Center in Geneva shone with lights. On the electronic board above burned an inscription in several languages. "Special debates, military power, a measure of peace?" The hall was overcrowded. Thousands of delegates, scientists, international journalists sat in tight rows. Millions of viewers around the world glued to TV screens in live broadcast. The atmosphere was tense, exciting, like at a final match. On stage stood two tables opposite each other. At one, Professor Volkov from Russia, with a confident look and cold gaze. At the other, Liam, Canadian journalist, in a neat dark suit with a calm face, but in his eyes burned determination. Between them, Anna, the moderator, strict and impartial. Anna began. Her voice rang loudly through the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we will have a frank dialogue. Professor Volkov will present his point of view on military power, and journalist Liam, a view from Canada. I invite Professor Volkov." Professor Volkov stood up, waved a hand, pointing to the screen. Appeared numerous images, graphs, numbers, defense budgets, number of tanks, planes, ships. He spoke loudly, every word like the blow of a hammer. "In our era, peace is protected only by the force of weapons. Can a small country with a few dozen squadrons, a few dozen tanks withstand a powerful enemy? Let us be frank. The Canadian ceremony does not prove strength. It only proves weakness." Stormy applause rang out from the sector of the Russian delegation, several whistles in support. The hall buzzed. Anna turned to Liam. "I ask you, Mr. Liam, your answer." Liam slowly stood up. He looked not at Professor Volkov, but straight into the hall, at the cameras which broadcast his speech to the whole world. His voice sounded calm but strong. "Ladies and gentlemen, yes, Canada does not have as many tanks or planes as Russia, but strength is measured not only by the quantity of weapons. If there is only a weapon, but no people, then all this is only soulless metal. Our ceremony is aimed not at scaring someone, but at reminding that this country was built and protected by blood, unbending will." Silence fell, and then applause rang out from the sector of ASEAN, which spread to Europe. The camera showed the face of the American journalist with tears in her eyes in close-up. Professor Volkov smiled squeamishly. His voice was full of sarcasm. "Beautiful words, but when war comes, can spirit stop missiles? Be realists, this world is built not on emotions, but on power." Liam did not rush with an answer. He withstood a few seconds of pause, and then pronounced clearly, word for word. "Professor, if strength consisted only in weapons, then countries possessing huge nuclear arsenals would have already brought peace to the whole world. But what is the reality? Conflicts continue to flare up, wars continue. Peace comes not from fear, but from justice, from mutual respect. And precisely this Canada emphasizes at every one of its ceremonies." Applause exploded. Some international viewers even stood up. The camera glided down, capturing the Indian scientist showing a thumb. A German journalist nodded approvingly. Anna intervened. Her voice sounded loudly. "Thank you both. Now we move to quick questions from the hall." A multitude of hands rose. An Indonesian journalist asked, "Mr. Liam, if not participating in an arms race, how is Canada going to preserve independence?" Liam answered without hesitation. "We preserve independence thanks to the principle of self-sufficiency, reliance on our own forces, while valuing our allies, and always putting the people in the center of everything. Our weapons may be fewer, but our will is greater than anyone's." The hall exploded with applause, but at this moment a Russian journalist unexpectedly raised a stack of documents and shouted into the microphone. "Beg your pardon, journalist Liam. If spirit is so important, why is Canada still forced to import weapons from abroad? Are your words not empty?" The whole hall froze. The camera immediately approached Liam. An incorrect answer to this question could destroy all his argumentation. He tightly squeezed the microphone, taking a deep breath. This was the biggest test. One answer, and he would either be crushed or force the whole world to fall silent. The atmosphere in the hall became oppressive. The Russian journalist's question was sharp as a knife. If spirit is so important, why is Canada still forced to import weapons from abroad? Are your words not empty? A whisper rose. Many leaned back in armchairs, waiting to see how Liam would extricate himself. The camera showed his face in close-up. This was a decisive moment. Liam tightly squeezed the microphone. In his eyes flashed an unusual light. He did not go into long reasonings and did not refute with numbers. He slowly, with a low, warm voice, pronounced, "Ladies and gentlemen, I will not answer with theory. I will simply tell one short story, literally for 30 seconds. The hall fell silent. All gazes were fixed on him. He took a deep breath and slowly began. "Last year in Ottawa, I met one veteran. The old man pointed to a long scar on his chest and said, 'When the enemy shot at me, the rifle in my hands was not the newest and not the most powerful. But I knew that behind my back was my whole family, my village, my country. I shot not to brag about the weapon. I shot to protect those I love.'" Liam paused, looked straight into the camera lens. His voice became lower. "Yes, we buy weapons. But weapons are only a tool. What allowed us to survive until today is not the tool, but the unbending spirit. Here is our answer." The whole hall froze, rooted to the spot. The camera glided over the faces of international viewers. The American journalist covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes shone. An African scientist nodded, whispering something to his neighbor. Many others straightened up, not blinking. And then, as if on command, the hall exploded with applause. At first rare, and then louder and longer. Some even jumped up, enthusiastically applauding. Professor Volkov frowned. He raised the microphone, trying to insert a word. "This is just a touching story, but we are discussing international security, not a novel." But his words drowned in unceasing applause. The camera focused on Liam, capturing his calm gaze, straight posture. He did not smile, did not pride himself, but only silently bowed. Moderator Anna raised a hand, asking for silence. When the applause subsided, she said, "Thank you, Mr. Liam. This was not just a 30-second story, it was a message. But for fairness, we will give Professor Volkov the opportunity to answer." Professor Volkov squeezed the microphone. In his eyes flashed anger. He lowered his voice, emphasizing every word. "Good. If you want to turn this hall into a place for telling stories, then I will turn it into a place where they speak the most cruel truth. I will show the whole world that Canada is not capable of protecting itself." The hall buzzed again. The camera approached Liam's face, catching the slightest reaction. He maintained calmness, but his hand squeezed the microphone so tightly that veins appeared on it. He knew that Professor Volkov's next words would be not just attacks, but a full-scale assault. The atmosphere in the hall heated up to the limit again. Professor Volkov came forward, forcefully put the stack of documents on the table. His gaze was fixed straight on Liam. His voice sounded sharp, as if cutting the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, I do not deny the value of spirit, but spirit will not replace missiles. Will does not intercept planes. Today, Canada is still forced to import weapons. If not for this support, could they survive? Let us be honest. They exist only thanks to others. Everything that journalist Liam said is only beautiful words to hide their weakness." A strong noise rose. Several journalists nodded. Someone whistled in sign of support. From the sector of Russian viewers rang out stormy applause. The camera continuously glided, capturing the arrogant expression on Professor Volkov's face. He did not stop, continuing to insist, "This world is cruel. No one respects a small country if it does not have the force of deterrence. If Canada does not have modern weapons, then let it know its place. It is just a second-rate country. Accept the truth, instead of embellishing it with touching stories." Stormy applause seemed to want to drown Liam. A multitude of lenses were directed straight at him, waiting for a reaction. For a moment he turned out to be in the center of a storm. Liam held the microphone, his hand squeezed white. He clearly felt every gaze fixed on him. Looks of doubt, expectation, even contempt. But inside him a strong fire flared up. He knew that if he did not withstand now, everything he said before would collapse. He took a deep breath. His gaze became bright. His voice sounded not loud, but enough to cover the noise. "Professor, ladies and gentlemen, you say that we exist only thanks to dependence. I want to ask, if so, who fell on Canadian soil? Who protected every patch of land with their blood? No great power can pay this price. If we lived only under patronage, then Canada would not exist today for you to mock it." The noise gradually subsided. In the hall, suddenly silence fell. The camera captured the faces of many international viewers. Someone nodded, someone frowned in thought. Liam paused, and then his voice sounded stronger, every word clearly. "You say that only weapons force others to fear, and I believe that only justice forces others to respect. Weapons can force for a moment, but when the barrel lowers, what remains? Only faith and national spirit exist eternally." Applause rang out from the European sector and then spread to other rows. But from the side of the Russians it was quiet. Their looks were cold. On Professor Volkov's lips played a half-smile. Anna approached, raised a hand. Her voice sounded loud. "We approach the end. To conclude these debates, I propose to each side exactly 60 seconds to give their final definition of what the real strength of a nation consists of." The hall buzzed again. Cameras glided over the two main heroes. Professor Volkov adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, preparing to strike the last blow. Liam tightly squeezed his hand. In his head sounded the words of the old veteran. "As long as the country is alive, as long as the flag flies, we are alive too." The whole hall held its breath. Camera lenses were aimed at the stage where the two main heroes were preparing to pronounce their concluding words. Anna looked at the red numbers of the electronic clock behind. Her voice sounded loud. "I invite Professor Volkov. You have 60 seconds. Professor Volkov stood up. His face was serious. He took several steps to the hall, microphone in hand. His voice sounded loud. "Ladies and gentlemen, the real strength of a nation is the ability to force others to be silent. It is an arsenal big enough so that no one dares to attack you. Let us be realists. This world respects only the strong, listens only to those who can impose their will with the help of firepower. A country can tell as many touching stories as it likes, but if it lacks the force of deterrence, all this is only an illusion." Stormy applause rang out from the sector of the Russian delegation. Several other viewers also supported, but in many international rows the atmosphere became gloomy. Looks were cold. Someone crossed arms. Someone quietly shook their head. Anna raised a hand. "Thank you, Professor. Now I invite Mr. Liam. You have 60 seconds. Liam stood up, went out into the center of the light. His heart beat wildly, but his voice was firm and clear. Every word. "Ladies and gentlemen, for me the real strength of a nation is not forcing others to fear, but forcing them to respect. Weapons can force for a moment, but when the barrel lowers, what remains? If the people do not believe in their country, if the world does not respect it, then even the most huge arsenal is only a pile of scrap metal." He paused. His gaze glided over the international rows, and then he looked straight into the camera. We conduct our ceremony not to brag, but to remember. Canada existed, exists, and will exist, not because we have the most weapons, but because we have the support of the people. There is a will which will never be broken. Here is real strength. Silence fell, and then, as if someone gave a signal, the hall exploded with applause. This time not rare, but stormy and prolonged. Some viewers even stood up, applauding without stopping. The camera glided over the European, African, Asian sectors. Many shouted, "Bravo! Respect!" Professor Volkov stood motionless. His face was tense. The arrogant smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of irritation and powerlessness. Anna quietly knocked on the microphone. Her voice sounded, "Thank you both. Official debates are completed, but obviously, today we heard not only numbers, but values." The hall still applauded. Liam bowed. His face was calm, but in his soul boiled indescribable pride. He knew that this moment would sound for a long time, not only in this hall, but in the air, all over the world. Applause did not subside even after the end of the debates. Television cameras glided over the hall, capturing touched faces, nods, unceasing applause. This picture was broadcast live all over the world. Millions of people from afar became witnesses of how a Canadian journalist stood up for the defense of the honor of his people. In the corridor of the conference, immediately after the end of the debates, international journalists pounced on Liam. Reporters crowded, holding microphones. A French journalist loudly asked, "Mr. Liam, do you consider that Canada won in today's debates?" Liam smiled and shook his head. "The matter is not in victory or defeat. It is important that the truth was spoken and our voice was heard." An American journalist squeezed forward. "Are you not afraid that these statements will cause tension in relations with Russia?" He answered decisively, "My words were not directed against anyone. I only reminded of value. Peace cannot be maintained by fear. It can be strengthened only by respect. Canada always strives for this respect." Short, restrained, but firm answers of Liam immediately became hot headlines. In just a few hours, large news agencies published articles. Voice from Canada forced International Hall to fall silent. Without weapons, Canadian journalist proved strength of spirit. Debates in Geneva. Canada asserts justice. Meanwhile, in the sector of the Russian delegation reigned a heavy atmosphere. Some faces, initially enthusiastic, now were lowered. Professor Volkov quickly went out, refusing comments. His confused look at the exit from the hall was captured by cameras and flew around the network with the caption, "Loser in debates." In a small cafe on the territory of the conference, Liam sat with several international friends. Indian scientist Raj slapped him on the shoulder. "You said what many other small countries long wanted to say. Today, Canada spoke not only for itself, but for them." Claire, a French journalist, smiled. "You did not simply argue, you left an image of a small but proud people who do not bow their heads." Moderator Anna approached. Her gaze was thoughtful. She did not say much, only quietly nodded. "You forced the whole hall to respect Canada." Liam was silent for several seconds and quietly answered, "It is not me. It is history. It is the spirit of my people. I only repeated it." On that night, the international press continued to publish excerpts from the debates. Liam's words widely spread in social networks, becoming a popular hashtag #RespectCanada. People from all over the world left comments. "I never thought about ceremonies from such a side. Very touching. Small country, but with a big voice. Strength is not only in weapons, but in the support of the people. Canada proved this." In his hotel room, Liam opened his phone and read messages from friends from Canada. One of them wrote, "You made us proud. At home, everyone watched live. The whole country speaks about you." He put aside the phone, took a deep breath, his heart filled with pride and relief. He understood that the battle was not yet finished, but today, Canada, at least, earned respect. Night in Geneva. Tall buildings shone with lights, reflecting in the shiny surface of Lake Geneva. The city still buzzed, but in the small hotel room Liam sat alone by the glass window, silently looking at the stream of cars below. On the table lay an open notebook. A clean page waited for his last notes. He took a pen. His hand still trembled slightly after the tense day, but on his soul it was surprisingly light. He wrote, "Today I became a witness of a miracle. An ordinary journalist, without power, without weapons. But when he spoke the truth, the whole international hall was forced to listen. Perhaps I did not change the balance of forces, but I believe that I changed the view of many people on Canada." He put aside the pen, raised his head, and looked out the window. In his memory surfaced the image of the trembling veteran with a cane, his hoarse voice. "As long as the country is alive, as long as the flag flies, we are alive too." These words seemed carved in his heart. They became the force which led him through all pressure, all threats. The phone quietly vibrated, a message from a colleague from Ottawa. "The whole country speaks about you. People share excerpts of your speech. Everyone is touched. You forced us to raise our heads." Liam smiled. He did not consider this his personal victory, but a victory of his people, their unbending spirit. He said to himself, "We do not need to brag to be recognized. We simply need to remind the world that Canada may not be the richest, but it was never weak. Our strength is in our people, in our memory and will, which will never disappear." Outside blew the night wind, carrying distant noise. Liam quietly closed the notebook, put the pen on the table. He knew that ahead many trials still awaited him, but at least today, he made his contribution so that the world better understood Canada. He stood up. His gaze was directed to the distant horizon, where the lights of Geneva merged with the night darkness. In his soul sounded a quiet whisper, as if addressed to his compatriots in the homeland. "We, Canadians, never gave up and will never give up." In this moment, Liam clearly felt that even one small word, spoken in the right moment, can become thunder which will force the whole world to listen. How do you feel after this story? If you are proud of Canada, leave a comment. Share the video so that many find out. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel to follow our next stories.